welcome to Restoring the Soul, a podcast dedicated to helping you close the gap between what you believe and what you actually experience. I'm your producer, Brian Beatty. Thank you for listening. On the next 2 episodes of Restoring the Soul, we're going to feature the first 2 parts of a 5-part series of conversations with Kelley Gray, our resident expert on the Enneagram. Michael and Kelley will unpack how the Enneagram can strengthen your marriage or intimate relationship. Now, the Enneagram isn't a new phenomenon. Depending on who you ask, its earliest iterations were either in the 1950s or in the early 1900s. Though there are some experts who say versions of it can actually be found in the writings of 4th century Christian mystics, and there are some who trace its roots all the way back to ancient Egypt. But it is a phenomenon, and it's gained new popularity in recent years, particularly among Christian circles. Now, in this episode, listen closely as Michael and Kelley describe how you can become an expert in knowing your partner or spouse, how they're wired, what they think about, what they do with their emotions, and understand what's difficult in their life. Now, to become an expert in someone else means you need to know yourself first. All good marriage and relationship work has to begin with good individual work. I know you're going to learn a ton in this episode, and you're not going to want to miss any part of this series of podcasts whose goal is to open up brand new pathways for intimacy and connectedness. So be sure to take a look at the show notes for links to the other insightful conversations with Kelley. And now, without any further delay, here's your host, Michael John Cusick.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to the program. Today, I am in the studio with Kelley Gray, who is an intensive clinical soul care specialist, i.e., intensive therapist at Restoring the Soul. And today, we are talking about the Enneagram and marriage. We are doing a 5-part series on 5 ways the Enneagram can strengthen your marriage or intimate relationship. And this episode is the first of 5, and it's simply called Becoming an Expert on Your Partner. So, Kelley, welcome to the program.
Hey, thank you so much for having me.
I'm excited to be able to talk with you about this. You have trained and worked and counseled around the Enneagram for years, and you speak around the country on the Enneagram. And right now, the Enneagram is kind of, how shall I say it? It's popular.
Yeah.
And it's kind of the cool thing that everybody is talking about, at least in certain circles. So we're going to hopefully talk about it in a way where there's substance and specific help for people. So what are you hoping for in this conversation about the Enneagram and intimate relationships?
I am so hopeful to share with people that the Enneagram is this awesome door that is just this wealth of information about yourself and how you do relationships, and a wealth of information about your partner and how they do relationships. And I feel like it's a freebie almost to study something that has such detailed information about how you and your partner go about handling problems and dealing with the pain of life and seeking out the joys of life. It just feels like such a shortcut around really a ton of personal work.
And we will be talking about all the ways that is a shortcut, 5 ways in particular over several episodes. But in this one, we're talking specifically about being an expert in your partner. And I got this phrase from you in a podcast that we did months and months ago. I think it was called A Passion for Growth. And you used this phrase that you wanted to become an expert in your husband and that you want to help your clients. So unpack what it means for a person to be an expert in their partner.
Yeah, somebody can read a ton of marriage books and kind of learn, we can really assemble some ideas of what it means to be an ideal partner, an ideal parent, an ideal boss or employee. But when it comes to your marriage or your intimate couple partner relationship, you're just with this one other person. And so you don't have to be everybody's ideal idea of a partner. You're just trying to meet the one specific individual person that you have been given and that you have chosen. You're trying to meet them where they are at. And so their needs might be pretty different from the general male or female population. So you don't need to know what every single person out there needs in a spouse. You need to know what one person needs.
Which sounds so intuitive that I don't need to love everybody. I just need to love this person. But you're referring to loving and caring in a very particular way for that particular person.
Yes. Knowing how they're wired, knowing, what their emotional needs are, how their mind works, what their expectations are of how the day should go. And I'm not talking about like people pleasing or perfectly performing. That is not at all what I am talking about. Just really opening yourself to just deeply understand the person that you have chosen to couple up with for a lifetime.
So you mentioned 4 things there really quickly: how they're wired, what their emotional needs are, how their mind works, and even what their expectations are for a day. Take a couple of those and unpack what that looks like to be an expert, for example, in how your husband, wife, partner is wired.
Yeah. So, I mean, as simple of a category as introvert, extrovert. If you are married to an introverted person and you are introducing an overwhelming number of extroverted activities, you're going to probably get a much lower functioning, more stressed out version of your spouse. Whereas if you say, okay, I see how this dude's wired. He can't handle dinners out with people or lots of people over to the house. What's kind of our optimal number? Because you're not going to go 100% his way. You're not going to go 100% your way.
So an extrovert might be willing to have company 7 nights a week, and an introvert that would just fry them. And by the way, fun little extroversion fact. Most people probably know that those categories are not about whether you're outgoing or not, but they're about how you're energized, right? That you're energized by being around people or not. And here's the trivia. Many people will be familiar with the name Timothy Leary, the former Harvard psychologist who is probably best known for doing LSD trips and things like that. So Timothy Leary, in the 1950s, I believe, is the one who invented the categories of extroversion and introversion. Wow,
I have just learned. Thank you for being so instructional. Thank you for teaching me. Well, but what's cool about that is, so we can't really do anything to change that. We're born with that
hardwired,
trait.
so to
That's
speak.
Hardwired, and so people who push other people to change that about themselves, they're just creating barriers in their relationship rather than saying, all right, I can learn what is, I can accept what is, I can work with what is. Those are much more laid back, happy partners.
As opposed to expecting, demanding, requiring the other person to be like us and to be energized. So let's move on to emotional needs. We're kind of touching on that, but what is an expert in your partner's emotional needs?
Well, you have to really observe them. And if you are married to a really emotionally loquacious person who likes to talk about their emotions and name them and explore them, I've worked with some partners who feel like they're a mismatch emotionally, that let's go counter gender stereotypes. Let's say we have a husband who really likes to talk about his emotions and unpack those emotions in detail, and a wife that says, I'm kind of wanting him to just get to the point, give me some bullet points and move this quickly. So that wife, I have to help work with her to slow down her expectations and to make space and really learn how to meet him where he is at. Otherwise, there's going to be a lot of frustration and a lot of disconnect. And what she's thinking is efficiency in kind of like trying to push past a lot of emotional, information. It actually ends up being the most, as you know, inefficient way of going about it, because the meter is running on those stuffed emotions of that husband trying to just kind of be low maintenance for her.
And that is so helpful to think about those emotional capacities. What about an expert in how your spouse's mind works? You talked about that. And you're not talking about IQ, but just how people process and kind of how we see the world.
That does really take a lot of study to really pay attention to and see how your spouse processes things. And I would say I really like the categories of internal versus external processor, that external processors, they don't know exactly where their destination is, but they verbalize the whole journey and then they arrive at their destination. Whereas internal processors, which can go along more with introversion, does not always, but can, that person really needs some time to take a step away and really digest all the thoughts that they are having, and then come back later on with having arrived at the destination of having thought something through, and then share with you their opinions about something, their thinking on something. Whereas if you force an internal processor to externally process with you, my metaphor for that is it's like pulling a cake out of the oven half baked. It is just, it's goo, and you're wanting to cut into it and see what they're thinking, but it's not fully formed yet. And so that is again hardwiring, and it really must be respected, or it causes more problems, puts more blocks and barriers up between people.
So that's, broadly speaking, the category of how we process internally or externally. It also brings to my mind the sense of how people handle conflict, and that's a cognitive issue, as well as we've talked about on other programs, a neurobiological issue where we can get triggered. But mind works in terms of, or how a mind works, even in terms of negatively interpreting. And being able to hear something where a spouse says, will you please take out the garbage? And the other person hears, I'm a terrible person.
You're a failure, that you didn't anticipate
and
that garbage.
To know that's a bent that a person has intellectually can be helpful. What are some other things?
Other areas of being an expert? I mean, you can watch how they do relationships. You can watch how they, how they've been impacted by their family of origin. You're just really trying to get a really full picture of who this person is.
And one of the categories, I think this was the final of the 4 that I repeated back, is an expert in what a person's expectations are for what a day looks like.
Yeah. And again, I mean, so I have some codependency in my history as of, like an hour ago, probably. I last practiced codependency. I really don't want this to come across as me saying, let's study this spouse so that we can, please their egos. So, that said, that disclaimer given, knowing their expectations for the day can just help you meet them more where they are at. And yes, I'm wanting them to know your expectations as well. And that really does make a person feel so much more seen and understood. And when a person feels seen and understood, that's a much more calm person that you're interacting with.
And much more willing to negotiate and to compromise and be willing to surrender to the other person's agenda if they feel safe and valued and seen. Well, things about expectations, even as simple as are they a morning person or an evening person? And I think I've seen people that have been married for many years and never really learned that the other person was an evening person because they always had to get up early for work, and they never actually talked about that, about how they like to stay up late, sitting in a chair by themselves, sipping tea and reading a book, but that was never anything that by virtue of being in graduate school or having kids or whatever could happen. And conversations about these preferences, expectations, etc., oftentimes don't happen.
Yeah, isn't that weird? It's just, I think it's such a strange function of being human that we don't have some of these really basic, obvious conversations with the person that we spend so much of our lives with. And so I love when I get somebody in therapy and I've got this little wonderful voluntary captive audience to just have them really do an audit and a walkthrough of where you guys missing each other, where are you not accepting just how this other person's wired, because that's not even getting into the category of behaviors. I'm just talking about wiring and some real basic ways that we can feel known, seen, understood.
Whether listeners have children or not, or whether they're even in an intimate relationship or marriage, it's so easy to kind of be an expert in the other person's schedule or in what their hobbies are or what their goal is in relation to work. And those things matter. But when kids come along and lots of other busyness and responsibilities in life, it's really easy to have a default where you know about the person and about the rhythm of their life, but not actually knowing the person. And this takes it's hard work. I mean, it's a cliche, but these kinds of committed relationships are really, really, really hard work.
Yeah, there's just a lot of maintenance that goes on. And I think that it's just a really common default human assumption that they should just kind of be able to go on autopilot. And a relationship will never, ever thrive or improve on autopilot. They're either getting stronger or weaker. What's your opinion on that one?
I think it's true. I had a mentor years ago that he said that every human life is moving toward God or away from God. And our less religious or Christian listeners might be thinking in terms of that we're moving toward goodness and beauty or away from goodness and beauty. And I think that's true. I also, as you were talking, I thought of Malcolm Gladwell's book where he talks about 10,000 hours that are needed. And let's see, that wasn't Blink, it wasn't Tipping Point, it was that Malcolm Gladwell book.
Yeah.
You know, the really good one that we can't remember the name of. It was right between David and Goliath and Blink. But in that book, he talks about how it takes a person 10,000 hours to become an expert in something. And I've been married 28 years, and I think that's more than 10,000 hours. But I've not spent 10,000 hours intentionally trying to become an expert in knowing Julianne. So I'm just thinking, wow, how many more hours do I have left? And struck by the energy and intentionality that it really takes to be able to honor the other person and love them in a particular way.
Okay, I have something super encouraging about that. I really don't think that I don't think we even have to think about it in terms of hours, but one intentional moment where you are just making really great eye contact and you're just very, very present and you're just showing you're just being really, really present with your person, and you ask them one question: how are you? And it's like the real how are you, not the cursory how are you.
It can't be that easy.
It's so easy, Michael. You should just try it.
So my whole 10,000 hour brilliant metaphor from Malcolm Gladwell, and we didn't remember the name of the book, you just deflated it, which is really wonderful. That is hopeful. That just a question like the real, how are you? And eye contact.
Delicious.
That can create a significant connection and have the other person really feel known.
Yeah. And if you do ask those questions through the days, weeks, months, and years, you'd get your 10,000 hours really fast. So we're probably fairly close on our spouses, but we'd have to ask them for our grades on how well they are feeling loved and known by their marriage expert spouses.
So we can't say, yes, I'm doing a great job. It really has to be to ask them.
Yes. You cannot grade yourself. Your spouse gives you your grade of how much expertise they feel like you have about them.
And that's probably not just a black and white conversation, but a conversation about the grade.
Yes, which is so fun. When people have run out of things to talk about at dinner, we're really loading you guys up.
So what happens when couples move into the space of becoming an expert in their spouse? What have you seen in the counseling office or in your own life?
They don't have as many boring and repetitive fights. So, those fights or disagreements, not all couples fight. Sometimes from Enneagram language, you have a couple withdrawing types who are married to each other and they just get quiet and go to separate parts of the house. But even with those couples, you don't trip over some of the same old topics and triggers. So I would say expertise in the other person really helps you sidestep landmines.
That sounds like a big one, and I think we're going to cover that in the subsequent episodes of 5 ways that the Enneagram can strengthen your marriage or intimate relationship. It also seems like it would build goodwill. Yeah.
So back to something you were saying earlier about when someone feels like they're being seen and they are known and they're feeling understood, it is so much easier you're flexible, you're generous. It's easier to give the benefit of the doubt. I talk a lot about marriages. You build an economy in your marriage. And so you're either building an economy of scorekeeping, of pointing out each other's flaws, of trying to one up. And that's it does not feel good, but it's really normal and common. And it takes usually both people to turn that economy around into an economy of generosity, of kindness, compliments.
I love that, the economy idea, because the first thing my mind goes to is transaction. So I bring my credit card, I write a check, I pay cash, and I get something in exchange for that. And how, of course, there's some level of transaction in relationships, but how love itself and the idea of just being known for who we are, that's not really transactional. So the idea of economy, that would be a great question. If our marriage were an economy, what kind of economy would it be?
Yeah. And just since I've been married almost 16 years now, every marriage is going to go through those seasons. And so I'm always going to be proclaiming just how much it's possible to turn things around when you've gotten into just too many negative patterns. Because once you wake up and say, oh my gosh, we've gotten in such a negative economy here of, wait, you just took a break and now it's my turn to take a break. And I've had these kids and I did the last 4 pickups and those kinds of things. Once you've woken up to the fact that you have gotten pretty negative, that is the moment that you can begin to change it. So
that's a positive way of saying it. I like that. So speaking of negative, what prevents a person from being an expert in their spouse? We just have a couple of minutes.
Well, our egos prevent it because our egos want to be defensive and they want to just really kind of hover around the way that we think that we deserve to be treated, that we are right, or I might have some idealized idea of how my relationship's supposed to be, and I'm not accepting my partner for who they are. So I'm going to say ego and defensiveness really get in the way.
And one that comes to mind just personally is I have lived so much of my marriage out of a scarcity mentality. That there's only so much inside of me that if I give it away, there won't be anything left. And that I have to have something from Julianne. Hey, let's wrap up with this. This has been a great conversation. This is part 1 of 5 episodes on the Enneagram in marriage. But you put together a list of 10 questions, and this could be 1,000 questions. We just jotted these down in the last day or so. 10 questions that couples can ask to one another to be an expert in their partner.
Yes. Okay. So here are some of your date night questions. Question number 1, what does your partner wake up dwelling on? Question number 2, how do they experience their emotions? Do they experience them more free-flowing, or are they more repressed or intimidated by their emotions? Question 3, which of society's ills bothers your partner the most? Question 4, what is their biggest unmet need, or top 3 unmet needs? Question 5, what would be their best day ever? 6, under stress, do they cling, withdraw, fight, and why? That's what you can take a few years to answer that one. Next question, what do you do that hurts them the most? I think I'm on 8. What are your partner's 3 biggest dreams, and what holds them back from pursuing those dreams? Question 9, and the wording here is very intentional. What scares the hell out of your partner?
Ah, great question.
Michael came up with that question. Question number 10, what is the most effective way to soothe your partner?
So, wow. Thank you for reading those. Those are just random questions that, as we were thinking about doing this episode, we put together. You could come up with your own, but I would encourage you to take 1 or 2 or 3 at most of these questions and to say, can we sit down and talk about this? I want to become an expert in you And regardless of whether they want to become an expert in you, this can open up some brand new pathways for intimacy and connectedness in your marriage or intimate relationship. So, Kelley Gray, thank you for being on the program today. We're going to do 4 more episodes, and we're going to be talking about the 5 ways that the Enneagram strengthens marriages and intimate relationships. So thanks, and look forward to next time.
Yes, love it. Thanks.
So we've wrapped up another episode of Restoring the Soul. We want you to know that Restoring the Soul is so much more than a podcast. In fact, the heart of what we have done for nearly 20 years is intensive counseling. When you can't wait months or years to get out of the rut you're in, our intensive counseling programs in Colorado allow you to experience deep change in half-day blocks over 2 weeks. To learn more, visit restoringthesoul.com. That's restoringthesoul.com.